Gemara and Sukkah Daf No and all the learning for this month, the month of Elul, as generously sponsored Zicha Nishmas as the Rezel Basar Meir. As we go into the home stretch of this wonderful Masechta Sukkah, learning the entire Chabura should bring her neshama higher and higher in Gan Eden Shalmaila. Of course, our Chedem Men Vega Chaim Mesach Shalom Simon Rezel Sarbas Ganan Delit Masim As Chayei Yisrael Min Delet Shamas Nam Viva Shafiur Shechan Shmom Bantila Tania Ben Chan Rezel Chaim Mesin Brach Was Musa Dinino Shin Min Nasviv Vegurun Khalizun Delu Rivgo Was Shem Nasal Simach Laster Pesai Sharchli Yisrael Was Chashich V'Sar Chaim in the very and Shir Miriam Bas Rezel Getol, and we pick it up from the bottom of Mem Tes Amid Beis, 2 lines from the bottom, the final week, Baruch Hashem, the final home stretch of this fabulous Masechta Sukkah, and already it's time to start gathering up the troops, spreading the word. Let's bring on more people on board. What a greater way to start the new year then with starting a new Masechta, a wonderful Masechta of Be'o, which will take us through the Yom Tovim. But for now, let's pick it up on the bottom of Testament Beis, Kamai Seyu Bechol, as we learn to the Mishnah. Just like they did during the week, so too they did on Shabbos. The only difference is referring to filling up the water. They wouldn't fill it up from the Shiluach on Shabbos. Rather, they would fill it up on Erev Shabbos. And we said it was in a deconsecrated vessel, so we didn't have a problem of Lina staying overnight. Ask the Gemara Vamai, what's the reason? Why don't they bring it in a cup that's already mikudashes? Why do we say they have to bring in a cup that is not mikudashes? Amar Ziri, Kosavar ein shir lamayim uklishares mekachim shlemidas. Says Ziri, you know the reason? Because our Mishnah holds there's no minimum amount that you have to have of the water. And as well, it's mikudashes without any intention. So let's see for a moment the final Rashi over here that's going to really set the tone for this Gemara. Rashi on the last line says, "Ein shir l'mayim sha'afilu yoysim shleish lugin ru'yi l'nasich." Any quantity is roi to pour for the water. To loy pirish ben tayir shir. The Torah didn't give us a precise shir. Helkach ru'yi l'kliyim. All the water that is drawn is considered roi fit for the vessel of chlomiyan mikachim, and the moment it goes in, it's mikudash as if calling it mikdash. Va'afilu einoi roi. And even if you don't want it to be mikudashes, she's kachu an machar hakli mikachim yad shaloi midas, and because of that, we're going to run into an issue. It's going to become lina. Says the Gemara on the top of Nun Amud Aleph explains his point, finishing up the parak. V'maisi b'mikudashes, with the aforementioned details that there's no minimum shear maximum, and with the aforementioned detail that automatically is mikudashes. If you bring it in a vessel that has sanctity, if salulu bilina, and you leave it over Friday night, by the time Shabbos comes, it's going to be possible. That's the reason, says the Gemara, you have to put it into a cup, into a vessel which is not mikudashes. Chizkiah Amar comes on Chizkiah and he says, Klisharis ein mikachin ella midas. The opposite, Klisharis only with intention. So therefore, why do you have to draw it into a vessel without sanctity? Explains the Gemara, Gzeir Shem Yamur L'das Nikshach. It's a Gzeira. We're afraid people are going to think that they did it with intent, and they're going to think they're going to mess up the halachas of Lina. And that's the second answer. Amar Rav Yanai, Amar Rav Zira. Third answer, there is a quantity. You have to have intent. We're afraid a different concern. We're afraid that they're going to think, what did you fill up this water for? They're going to think you didn't necessarily fill it up for the Nisach HaMayim and the pouring of the water. Rather, as Rashi speaks out, they're going to think that you filled it up for the Kohen Gadol Malayim. Fill up for the Kohen Gadol, and therefore it's going to be Mikudeshes automatically because it's filled up for the pouring of the hands and the legs. And therefore, that's the reason why you have to put into a vessel which is not mikudeshes. And of course, it should remind us of the Gemara in Yuma that we learned that the Kohen Gadol would fill up and would pour in his hands from a special kitin shel zav, as Rashi points out, not directly from the kiyar. And that's the concern that people are going to think that's the reason why the water here is being drawn. Says the Gemara, but what happens? You did it in a vessel which is not mikudeshes, and someone spilled the bucket. Someone kicked it over. Says the Gemara, so he said that in B'diavad you can fill it up from the kiyar. Ask the Gemara, what's the problem? The problem is that if it's nisgalsa, if it's revealed, not that it's kicked over, that one we understand. But we said if we leave it open, it's a problem. What's the problem? Problem is leaving something overnight, giloy. What's the problem? We're afraid a snake came and put his poison in it. Says the Gemara, so what's the big deal? Just put it through a sifter. And then we'll know that there's no poison inside. Lemas nizan to like Rav Nechemia. This sounds not like Rav Nechemia. Titania misanenes yishu misham giloi. A misanenes has a din of kilo. Yonam Rav Nechemia. He must say bizman shetachtonim megula. Only if the bottom is open. Avol bizman shetachtonim mechusa. Avol bishal yonim megula. Ein boy misham gila. Why not? It's like a sponge. And he's going to stand in its place. So seemingly the fact that our Mishnah does not allow you to put it through a sifter, seemingly is not going to opinion of Rav Nechemia. Because according to Rav Nechemia, we shouldn't be concerned because the poison stays over there. You put it through the sifter and everything is fine. So the fact that our Mishnah does not suggest that, but rather says that if it's opened up, you got to take new water, shows us we're not going with Rav Nechemia. Answers the Gemara, no. Afilu temer Rav Nechemia. Eimar demer Rav Nechemia lehediyit. Havali kavaya mi amar. Teretz number one. It's true. For a mere mortal, it's enough to sift it. But you're going to give that food to God. You're going to give Hashem that water. It's not befitting to give Hashem water that you sifted out the poison. And therefore, for God, what do you have to do? You take new water. Says the Gemara of Lesser Rav Nechemia craven al Succah Succah. Says the Gemara. But let's later on Nechemia. Does Nechemia not follow the following pasuk that says, "Hakriveu na livchascha"? You should give it to Hashem if you please. Hayirtzcha ya yisaf anecha. Will it be desirable? Yisaf anecha Hashem show you favor. Amar Hashem savakais. Says the Gemara. No, even if Nechemia agrees, it's a problem. What's the problem? A different problem. Nothing to do with snakes. The reason is it's not appropriate. Is this water you're going to give to Hashem? Or is Hashem going to be pleased? Is he going to show you favor? If you give him this type of carbon, this type of water which is left open, it's inappropriate. It's low level. And that's the reason why even Rav Nechemia would agree it's inappropriate to use this water, which of course harkens us back to the discussion we mentioned 2 days ago. And this is where the halacha that wine should not be left open because it's not nice. Would you serve it to a noble? Would you serve it to Would you serve it to a lefechasecha? Would you serve it to a noble? Would you serve it to a governor? You absolutely would not. Which is, of course, the reason that we pointed out 2 days ago. Nowadays, of course, you would. It's even better when you let the wine breathe, and that's the reason why Allah Lamaisam and he points to let your wine breathe before Kiddush, because that is the even more dignified in a manner to serve it. We should do a chazara, return back to this wonderful fourth parak, the second to last parak. And Emeretz Hashem, with that, we should bring us with the fire into the final parak, the home stretch of Masechtes Sukkah. Says the Mishnah, beginning the 5th parak, Har Chalil, Chalil is a flute. Chamisha v'shisha is either 5 or 6 days of Yantif. Zel Chalil shebeis ha'shveva, the flute of the Simcha is beis ha'shveva. She'einai daiche, lois ha'shabbos, lois Yantif, is not daiche, Shabbos or Yantif. And the bottom Rashi explains, Hilkach, Chal Yantif lios b'Shabbos. If the first day is Shabbos, so the flute is not daiche Shabbos. So how many days are left? 6 days of Cholamayid. Of course, 1 day of Yantif. Pashlu Shisha Chol Shamayid. Nimsa Chalil, Shisha. But Chal, Yantav, Bechol, if let's say Yantav is during the weekday, number 1. Then there's 2 days that you're missing. Havlei Trei Yom Shabbos v'Yantav, 2 days that you have to not have the flute. Both on Shabbos and in Yantav, T'ladachilei, Pashlu Chamisha, and that's you're going to have 5 days. So the flute of the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, says the Mishnah, is either 5 or 6 days. Moving over to, Nun Amid Bi. Says the Gemara, Itmar. We learned Rav Yehuda, Rav Ina, Chadatani Shaiva, Chadatani Chashuva. One learned that what's the Mishnah referring to? The Simchas Beis HaShoyeva. One learned it was called the Simchas Beis HaChashuva. Now the Gemara explains, Amar Mar Zotcha, Mandatani Shauva loy mishtabish, V'lantani Chashuva loy mishtabish. Neither one is a mistake. They're both correct. Mandatani Shayeva loy mishtabish. Why not Tachsev Shaftamayim B'Saslin? You draw the water with gladness. That's the Simchas Beis HaShoeva from the word of V'Shaftem. Umandatani Chashuva loy mishtabish. Damar Rav Nachman mitzvah Chashuva hi. This mitzvah of drawing the water is a wonderful and incredible mitzvah from the 6 days of creation. So you either can refer to it as the Shayeva or the Chashuva. They're both not incorrect. 2 different Makarim, Shaftamayim B'Sasayin, or the Makar of that it's a mitzvah Chashuva. Says the Gemara, what was the Mishnah talking about? The Chalil. the flute. And the Mishnah seemingly, what flute was it talking about? Tana Rabbanan says, the Gemara discussion that we're going to begin now, it's going to take us to today's Amud, is going to be the first opinion, and tomorrow we're going to have another opinion. Tana Rabbanan Achalil Doichas HaShabbos Divi Rav Yosi Rav Yehuda. The flute is Doichas Shabbos, and we'll see what this means in one moment. It's not even Doichas Yantif. A statement of Raisa. Is the flute Doicha Shabbos? And Yantiv Rav Yosi says, yes, Rav Yosi does, it's Doicha Shabbos. Chum says it's not even Doicha Yantiv. Now the question is, what flute is this in reference to? So Amar Rav Yosef, and again, let's key in, this is the opinion of the way Rav Yosef is explaining the Mechlaikas between Rav Yosef Yehuda and the Chachamim. And again, the foreshadowing is that tomorrow we're going to have a second opinion, and we're going to refute this Rav Yosef. Amar Rav Yosef, Machlaikas is B'shir Shal Karbon. This Machlaikas of the Chalil has nothing to do with Sukkahs. Has to do with you bring the flute when you bring a Karban, which Karban, as Rashi explains, 12 days when you say Hallel, you play the flute during the Karban Talmud when you bring the Karban. So says Rav Yosef, that's the machlekes. If those days fall on Shabbos or Yom Tov, Rav Yehuda says it's Doicha, Chachamim say not. Rav Yosef Savar, Iker Shira Bikli, the Iker way of singing Dashem is with the vessel, with the flute. Va'avoidi, therefore it has the status of Avoida, V'deichas Shabbos. That's the first opinion of Rav Yehuda. V'Rabbanan Savri, no, Kishira Bepevel of Avoidihi, Ve'no Deichas Shabbos. The Iker is the mouth, the singing. The flute is just an accompanying instrument, and therefore the Chachamim say it's not Doicha at all. Avol, explains Rav Yosef, Shir Shel Shayeva, the Shir of the Simcha is Beis HaShayeva, Devrei Akol Simcha Yiveino Doichas HaShabbos. So Rav Yosef's opinion is, which we're now going to source. Now when it comes to Simchas Beis HaShayeva, everyone agrees it's not Doichas Shabbos, which of course fits with the Mishnah. What is the machlekes where Rav Yosef Yehuda says it's yes Doichas Shabbos, Chum says it's not Doichas Yantif? That's the flute being played by Hallel on the 12 days throughout the year. And the machlekes boils down to, what is the ikar? Is the ikar the Hallel they sing, and therefore the flute is just auxiliary and it's not doicha? Or is the ikar the flute the shir b'kli, and therefore it is doicha? Amar Rav Yosef Mina Amino, where do I get this? How do I know if this is the machlekes raised by Yehuda and the Chachamim? We have a klisharis that is made out of wood. Rabbi Paisa Yehuda Machshir. Okay, so we have a vessel, a servicing vessel in the Beis HaMikdash, made out of wood, a machlekes Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef Yehuda as to the status. Says the Gemara, my laba klifgi, what is the machlekes man the machshir savar kashira bikli? That the main ingredient is the shiras with the utensil, with the instrument, and therefore, if it's made out of wood, we learn now from the flute of Moshe Rabbeinu, the flute of Moshe Rabbeinu was made out of wood. So just like the flute of Moshe Rabbeinu was made out of wood, so too the flute and the Beis HaMikdash could be made out, the Chalil, the heart, could be made out of wood, and therefore it's going to be kosher. Oman de pasal, according to Mandarma, that says no, if it's made out of wood, it's pasal. Savegur shir bepeh. Really, the ikar is with your mouth. And therefore it can't be made out of wood. So says Rabbi Yosef, that is the machlekes that we just had. That's the machlekes of Rav Yehuda and Rabbi, is the machlekes whether the ikar is with your mouth and the instrument is auxiliary, so it does not necessarily have to be made out of wood, or I should say it cannot be made out of wood. Or is the ikar with the instrument, and therefore we learn it out like Moshe Rabbeinu's avuva flute can be made out of wood. Says the Gemara, again, Rav Yosef explained the machlokes of Rav Yosef, Rav Yehuda and the Chachamim. The Gemara is now suggesting that Rav Yosef got this from a brisa that explained whether a klisharis can be made out of wood is dependent whether the ikar is with the mouth or with the instrument. Says the Gemara, Loi, that is not what is going on. The kuli alma ikar shira b'kli, everyone agrees the main ingredient is with the kli, is with the instrument. So what's the machlekes? Whether you're allowed to make the flute out of wood, the klisharis out of wood. The machlekes is, says the Gemara, do we learn out cases where there is a possibility from cases where there was no possibility? Because by Moshe Rabbeinu there was no possibility, Rashi explains. It had to be made out of wood. Because if you take the flute and you make it by anything else, it's going to ruin the sound. So do we learn out from that case to other cases? Man, the opinion says it's kosher, so done in afshar mishi afshar. We learn out cases that's possible for cases that's impossible. Moshe Rabbeinu was impossible. But even now when we have the Beis HaMikdash that it's possible to make the instruments out of other materials, still he holds it is kosher. Uman de mafsil, the puzzle savar loy den afshar mishi afshar. So that is terrorist number one, refuting the source of Rav Yosef, refuting that the source is whether the ikrs with the mouth or the ikr with the instrument came from whether you could have the klisharis of wood. Says the Gemara that is not what that machlekes is by the klisharis of wood. The machlekes by the klisharis of wood is whether we learn from Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu's flute could not have been made from anything else aside from wood. So do we learn out from there or not? Let's see one Rashi that's going to speak out this point that we just said. Rashi ain't done in Afshar Mishi Afshar. Shar Kalim Afshar Shir Shalmatachas. Other klisharis, they could be made of metal. Vein mechubadim, and it's going to be wonderful. Helkach me'minayra yalfin aluv loy me'avuv de Moshe. We're not going to learn from the flute of Moshe. Why not? The Alsam by Moshe Rabbeinu. Taimo mishom shi Afshar las Shalmatachas. You can't make a flute out of metal. Why not? The Gemara Erechim says that they tried to cover it with gold. You know what happened? And it wasn't Kali Arif. So therefore they took off this covering, and now wonderful, it sounded great. So that's specifically by Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore we don't learn everything else from it, so everything else could be of other ingredients. We learn out from Moshe. Even though Moshe was a special din by a flute, we learn all klisharis from there. Klisharis days, once we find one case of wood, we learn all the cases from there. But again, the Gemara says, this cannot be the source of Rav Yosef. Whether the machlaik is between Rav Yosef, Rav Yehuda, and the Chachamim, whether the Chalil is going to be Deich HaShabbos, cannot be this machlaik is Rav Yosef, Rav Yehuda, and Rabbi, whether the klishari is allowed to be made out of wood. Iba Yisema says the Gemara, another answer, the Kuli HaMaker Shira B'Peh. Really, everyone could agree the main part is the singing. Vein dan afshar mishi afshar. We don't learn out from Moshe Rabbeinu. So what's the machlekes? Whether you let have klisharis out of wood? The machlekes is in different drashas. Do we learn klalu prat or ribo yumiyat? Rabbi darish klalu prati. Rav Yehuda Savar Darish, Ruba Yumi Uti. Now the Gemara explains, Rabbi Darish Kali Ubrati. It says Vasisa Minaira, which is a klal, a general statement, make a Minaira. Klal. Zov Tar, then it says pure gold. That's a prat, that's an exclusion. Makshet Asa Menura, you should make a beaten. Chazer Klal. So we have a klal, upratu klal. Klal, upratu klal. What's the halacha? What's that mechanics? He has to done alkin apparatus be similar to the exclusion. Ma'abram Furshamatachas. Exov has to be metal. So that's the source that Rebbe says the klisharis cannot be out of wood. Is why? Because klal upratu klal. We find by the Menaira, it says general, it says specific, it says general. Klal upratu klal. The rule, it has to be like the prat, and therefore the halacha is it could be made out of metal, and anything can be made out of metal. Rav Yehuda says no. He darshan riba yumiuti, but sees him in riba zav tar. Riba, Zav Tar, being pure gold, Miat, Makshet Tasa, Amanayra, Chazav Riba, Miat Veriba, Riba, Kol includes everything. And that's what Rav Yehuda says, my Rabbi Kol Mili, and my Mad Michal Cheres, so it could even be made out of wood. So the machlokes between Rav Yehuda and Rabbi, says the Gemara, is a fundamental machlokes. What is the source for Menayra? Is it Riba, Miat, Klal, Upratu Klal? But again, a second terror is that it's not a debate whether Iker Shir B'Peh or Iker Shir B'Kli, like Rav Yosef suggested, is the machlekes between Rav Yosef, Rav Yehuda, and the Rabbanan. That is not the source. Two different ways of refuting that this could be the source of Rav Yosef. I'm going to pick it up from here from Rav Papa, and as much as we've been in the middle of a discussion, Rav Papa is going to come along and he's going to say this point of Rav Yosef, whether Iker's big player or Bikli, is really machlekes Tanoim, and we'll pick up from here tomorrow in Mirza Hashem.